Blake 7. As a title, it doesn't trip off the tongue very well. I've always pronounced it Blake 7. Anyway, Terry Nation, a writer who created the Daleks for Doctor Who and went on to script edit TV shows like The Avengers before going off to America, had created a show called The Survivors, and then went on to pitch an idea to the BBC, which was basically Robin Hood in space. The title also being derived from the film The Magnificent Seven. Blake 7 is often seen as a British version of Star Trek, but rather than boldly going, Blake 7 was more about oppression and a totalitarian state, with people fighting for their free will and fighting back against the Federation. It is similar to Star Trek in that both series have an amazing spacecraft and a teleport capability, but there is more to it than that, rather than just being a clone of a US program. Starting in the late 70s and lasting 4 seasons on the BBC, it's genuinely well scripted and a competently acted show. It replaced a police series called Softly Softly Task Force and had its predecessor's budget. Because of an inbuilt dislike of fantasy and science fiction at the BBC hierarchy, but because of the success of Star Wars and Terry Nation had a very good reputation at the time, BBC heads gave it a green light to start production. Unfortunately, they couldn't see that in a show where everything had to be designed, being clothes, props and such like, as well as the special effects budget allocated to the show, it was exactly the same budget as the police drama, so it was unsurprisingly that the money for the series ran out extremely quickly. But for the most part the effects are good given the time and money, and only occasionally fail totally, like for instance the very strange cardboard cutout Liberator special effects. The designer of the interior and exterior of the Liberator was Roger Murray Leach, who does a sterling job. I love the guns and the communication stroke teleportation bracelets, costumes of the regulars and the Federation troops. Title and incidental music was all done by one man, Dudley Simpson, and it is effective and brilliant throughout the series. But as always, it's the characters that make it work. Gareth Thomas as Roger Bake, Michael Keaton as Villa Restal, David Jackson as Oled Gann, Sally Knitbit as Jenna Stannis, Jan Chappell, Kelly, Jacqueline Pierce, Sutherland, Stephen Grief, replaced by Brian Croucher in the second series, was Travis, and arguably the most popular cast member, Paul Darrow as Kerr Avon. Not forgetting Peter Tattenham as the computer voices, Zen Slave, and from series 2 onwards, Aurak. In later seasons the main characters Dana Mellenby, Del Tarrant and Sulin were introduced. The premise of the series is that Blake was a freedom fighter, but rather than having him executed, Blake had his memory erased and would speak out for his oppressors, the rather nasty Federation, and speak against the dissidents he once led. But after a meeting where Blake is told the truth about his reality, what happened to him, he witnesses the Federation massacring an unarmed group of people. Having been convicted falsely of being a paedophile, he is then exiled to a prison penal colony planet called Cygnus Alpha. En route by spacecraft and through a series of events, he escapes along with others and manages to acquire a ship of his own, the Liberator, with the most sophisticated technology, a teleportation device, superior handguns and a supercomputer called Zen. Blake leads his followers in hoping to succeed with him in his mission and dream to free the people from the corrupt and all-powerful Federation, with Commander Sutherland and Travis being the main enemies. Terry Nation was not the greatest television writer, sliding into B-movie territory in his writing style, with a coincidence-based plot, but a nice ear for dialogue and natural comedic moments being his main traits. Chris Croucher, the script editor, really shaped the whole series, writing several episodes himself, as well as writing up Terry Nation's script, which was sometimes just a few pages of treatment and scene breakdowns. Chris would pen the fourth and final episode, Blake. Gareth Thomas wanted to direct some of the third season, but at the time it was frowned upon for an actor to both direct and to act in the series, so Gareth left. The problem with Series 3, should it go ahead without the main lead? Blake 7 without the title character Blake, would it work? With Paul Darrow now taking the lead as Avon, the answer was a resounding yes. After all, 7 was a very ambiguous number as to how many people there were actually following Blake in the fight against the Federation, so Blake 7 without a 7 and now without a Blake didn't seem to matter too much. Gareth did make a small cameo at the end of the third series and was asked back again for the definitive final ever episode of season 4. Gareth agreed only if it was explicitly clear that his character would be dead, and to prove this he had his guts blasted out. One thing about Blake 7 is at the end of each series, they always leave on a cliffhanger. Blake 7 was going to end after the 3rd series, with some of the cast and crew moving on to different projects. Everyone watching the closing credits at the time it was first transmitted was shocked when the continuity announcer stated that it will be back for another series, so a 4th and final series entered production and was even more rushed than usual. When originally broadcast, I can just about remember seeing the Liberator in flight. I can vividly recall the season 4 opener, Rescue, and being terrified by the blue screaming aliens in the forest. I always thought that the spaceship was called Blake 7 because Blake was never in the episodes that I watched as a nipper. On the whole, apart from 1 or 2 dreadful stories, and if you can forgive the not so special effects at times, the odd pantomime villain, and some wooden acting here and there, Blake 7 is a wonderful, surprising, gritty, adult-themed, especially the first few episodes, with some shocking moments, and it had one of the bleakest endings in television history ever. A documentary by Kevin Davis, originally to be released at the same time as the VHS releases in the early 90s, and an updated version to go on the DVDs, was abandoned on both occasions. Kevin directed 30 Years in the TARDIS, Dalek Mania, and worked on The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and the opening titles of Terrorhawks, and directed a Doctor Who spin-off called Shakedown, which had some of the Blake 7 cast in it. Clips of the documentary were shown on the DVD releases, but not the full versions, which is a travesty. Never mind. There have been further audio dramas, radio spin-offs, and numerous attempts of rebooting the series, but these have not come to fruition. This is not surprising because Blake 7, Star Trek and Star Wars cheap rip-off, went on to influence several other sci-fi series, including Lex, Babylon 5, and most notably, Firefly. If you have not seen the series, I highly recommend you get the DVD box sets.